So, I'd like to begin by just thanking all of you deeply for being here. There are both new friends and old friends here. And I'd also like to honor Hogan and Jan, who are two masters and teachers, and to have you both here in presence is a deep honor for me, so thank you both for being here. And to everybody here who is either just starting on the path or just exploring, just know that I deeply care about you and deeply love you on a fundamental level. So, to begin, I want to also extend some deeper gratitude to the people that made this evening possible, and also to what made these books possible that we'll be speaking about tonight. So first, I'd like to thank Samadhi. I'd like to thank John Churchill and Nicole Churchill. They've curated this space for about 10 years, and so I'm deeply grateful for them. And I'd like to thank Ken Wilber. Ken Wilber has been both a friend and mentor of mine over the past decade. And Ken has taught me an incredible amount intellectually about how all of our great wisdom traditions and religious traditions might fit together into a comprehensive framework. So I'm deeply grateful to Ken. I'm also really grateful to Dan Brown. As you heard from several people here, we just sat on retreat with Dan Brown. Dan Brown was my thesis advisor at Harvard. He was at Harvard Medical School. And Dan is also my meditation teacher. And I've learned an incredible amount about the deep structures of the spiritual path, the deep structures of awakening from Dan. So honoring him. And welcome, newbies. And then finally, I'd like to thank a woman named Cindy Wigglesworth. And Cindy believed in me years ago and actually said that she'd be willing to support me for a year and a half to write the first book in this series. And it was through her generosity and her financial offering that I was able to write these books. So I was told from a friend once that one of the best ways to start is always starting from gratitude. So I want that field to be here. I'm deeply grateful. I'd also like to share with all of you a little bit of a dream I have. And this is a dream that came in an instant. And it's a dream that led me to both writing both of these books, Streams of Wisdom and Evolution's Ally. And it's a dream that stays with me deep in my heart. So, in 2006, I was at a gathering called the Integral Spiritual Center. And this was a group of spiritual teachers who were brought together by Ken Wilber, mostly lineage holders from different traditions. There were about 35 teachers there. And the idea was, is there something like a universal path, a universal deep structure around awakening, around waking up? And is there a universal structure around growing up through various stages of how we interpret religion? And all these teachers got together with a heart impulse that something more was possible. That it was possible that people might be able to stay in their particular religious tradition, but also move beyond it into some sort of trans-lineage space. And as that idea was articulated, it was like I got hit with a bolt of lightning. And as that bolt of lightning came through me, there was a clear vision of a mission that I was given in that moment. And the seed said that I was to write a series of books, which is now what I finally completed, so I'm thrilled about that. But it also said that those books and the books written by others would help to lay a foundation for a truly trans-lineage spirituality, a spirituality that includes the depth and wisdom from traditions, but also then allows a space where people can actually stand nakedly together as humans and actually offer the full benefit of what they've learned in their lineage, but collectively be together in a trans-lineage space. And since then, I've started calling that the great human tradition, or the lineage of humanity. And so with that lightning bolt flash, I realized that I had to really get to work. But at that particular point in time, I didn't have the proper training in religious studies. And so I realized that I needed the credentials, and I went back to graduate school. And it was with that unfolding, both of that initial lightning bolt flash and then the subsequent work that's happened over the past few years, that a clear image has come to mind. And I'd like to share that with you now, and then I'd like to get into the content of the book. So the idea is that we as human beings are moving out of a planetary model where there are gurus and teachers as suns with planets moving around them. That'll still occur, but that's not the limit of what's possible with our spiritual traditions. So there will still be suns with planets and solar systems, but it's now possible to actually take an even larger view. It's possible to see all spiritual teachers standing together as suns, as part of a larger galaxy. And as we take that galactic view, we begin to understand that all of these great traditions, all of these lineages, all of these stars in the galaxy are actually swirling around a central black hole. And that central black hole is the potential that we all coalesce around, this intention of the cosmos. And as we begin to see ourselves as a galaxy, rather than simply as suns divided, there's something possible on the human stage at this particular moment in history that is deeply inspiring and deeply hopeful. And so it's with that series of ideas, the series of inspirations, and then it's with that galactic vision of what's possible between traditions, between lineages, between teachers, that I wrote these books. It's with that intention that I'm here to share with you tonight. And so I understand that we have differing levels of interest, differing levels of practice, and differing levels of familiarity with integral theory or with integrative theory. And so I'm going to speak in a very simple language, and I'll try to keep the complexities for side conversations or for conversations when people ask questions. So I'd like to just give a frame about what we'll do tonight in the content of the book and in our interactions together. Tonight will involve both third-person content. That means that we'll be talking about things in a third-person way. That means I'll give you content and ideas, frameworks. There will also be first-person meditation. So it'll be a particular point in the evening where I'll offer you some very specific pointing out instructions around what I'm talking about in these books so that you can have the direct experiential knowledge, not just conceptual knowledge. And then also we'll do some intersubjective work. That's working in the second person. We'll actually turn towards each other and engage each other. And it's my opinion that an evening that integrates first-person practice, second-person relational engagement, and third-person theory is a holistic evening. So know that we'll be doing all of those. So if you were coming only for third-person theory and you were terrified of speaking to each other, you'll get to face that fear, if you're willing. Great. Hi, welcome. So I'd like to start by just giving a three-part framework. And this is a three-part framework that I've found extremely helpful. Extremely helpful not only for my own work in writing, but I think it's something that's extremely helpful if we begin to take this larger galactic view. If we begin to see how might different lineages, how might different traditions actually interact with one another. So the first is something that I've learned from my meditation teacher, Dan Brown, and it's called understanding vantage points. So vantage point, this word vantage point is a technical term, but it's something very simple. And it means in any given moment, we can track where our awareness is coming from. Who is the knower? Where's our subjectivity? And in the most basic of frameworks, we can say that awareness at its most fundamental level is often caught up as our physical body, or is often caught up as thought. That means that we have the confused idea that awareness and thought, or awareness in our physical body, is the same thing. But what we find as we continue our meditation practice, as we continue our contemplation and insight into our own awareness, we begin to learn that there are stretches of meditation or stretches of contemplation where we're not actually thinking, yet awareness is still present. And it's in those moments when awareness is present that we're not thinking that we recognize awareness must be different than, awareness must be deeper than thought. There's something else that awareness is. As that trajectory continues to unfold, we begin to realize, wow, my emotions also are always changing. They're always in a flux, always in a flow. Yet I feel the same. This awareness in me is always here. As the path continues, we get the sense that there's a sense of self, a static sense of self that's been with us throughout the course of our life. And we start to identify with that. We say, I am Dustin, or I am Michael, I am Day. But as we begin to do true meditation practice, what starts to happen is that we begin to see that even that self on a fundamental level changes over time. The preferences, the desires, what it's attracted to, what it's not attracted to, these things begin to slowly settle, and we begin to recognize, wow, there's even a deeper self than that. There's a deeper layer of awareness that doesn't get caught up in the preferences, likes, and dislikes of a personality structure. As that continues, there's also a sense that the self, by its very nature, is caught in some sort of space-time matrix. So we begin to think that, well, it's this moment now, and then a few moments have passed, and there's still the same self there. And a few moments have passed, and yet there's still the same self there. And we begin to understand that there is a level of our awareness that's always in this ever-present now. There's a level of our awareness that's always here and present, regardless of the passing of time. As the path continues, deeper layers of awareness begin to unfold, and some of those layers, as many of you know, begin to collapse the idea of subject and object. They begin to collapse the idea of a knower and the known. And so what I've done in the first few chapters of some of my writing, and particularly in the first book, is I've traced those stages of unfolding, vantage points. I've traced the layers that subjectivity can move, and I've articulated those through the language of the various traditions. So how do these different vantage points show up in Buddhism, as we've learned them from our meditation teacher? But also, how do these show up in Christianity? How do these shifts in vantage points show up in Islam? How do these shifts of layers of subjectivity show up in Hinduism? And by doing that, what I've tried to outline is the fact that there's actually a deep structure to the process of awakening through these deeper vantage points. And if we can begin to articulate that deep structure, we can actually begin to point towards something that's more universal, something that's more human, not clouded in lineage, but obviously drawing deeply from lineage. So that's the first point I wanted to offer, is that there's a shift that can happen in our awareness, and it's a shift through vantage points. It's a shift that we sometimes call waking up to the universal nature of reality, the true nature of reality, collapsing the subject-object duality at its deeper vantage points. And it's important that we take that, we just set it in this beautiful bubble, and we actually say, that's what's most important. So I'm going to talk about two more things, and I just want to say that that dimension of waking up, that dimension of shifting and finding out who we truly are on a fundamental level, is actually what matters most. But that's not all that's happening in our experience. Something else that's happening in our experience is that we learn that as human beings, we're actually growing up. As human beings, we naturally move through stages that when we're younger, we're more egocentric in our orientation. As we grow through stages, we become a bit more ethnocentric. We care just about our community, our family, our tribe. As we continue to grow, we emerge into world-centered consciousness. We start to see all of humanity connected. We start to see all of humanity as the fundamental part of ourselves. As things continue to grow, we sometimes say we move into a cosmocentric awareness. So for those of you familiar with integral theory, this is what Wilber speaks about when he talks about development. He has the spiral of development. But the interesting thing is that you can be at any one of these vantage points. You can be at any one of these levels of consciousness, these levels of subjectivity, and yet you might still have this structure or this lens of interpreting the world at one of these other stages. You might interpret the world through an ethnocentric lens or a world-centric lens. And as we begin to unpack this, it becomes extremely important that we see that each of these stages of development, from egocentric to ethnocentric to world-centric and to cosmocentric, are also present in our world's religious traditions. And if we can begin to map how different levels of interpretation show up, and how people then work with these interpretations to then affect behavior, we actually have a pathway through which we can help the traditions themselves not serve as a barrier to evolution, but as a catalyst. What we often find is that the world's great religious traditions tend to be trapped at more ethnocentric levels of development, where religion actually creates barriers, religion creates boundaries, it creates things of deep conflict among people and among cultures. But as we deepen our understanding of this pathway of development, we can begin to articulate world-centric expressions of each tradition, world-centric expressions of Islam, world-centric expressions of Christianity, world-centric expressions of Buddhism, and so on. And so another key part of my work is to show these stages of unfolding, these stages of development as they show up in traditions. And then finally, the third sphere is that in any given moment, we're always in a state. We're always in a particular realm, always having a field of experience. And one of the things that I've noticed in my interaction with friends, with peers, with a lot of different teachers around the globe, is that there's often a deep confusion between changing states and changing vantage points. So I'd like to just articulate a little bit about that. So a state is what is known. It's what's happening in our field of experience. Our field of experience is always changing. In any given moment, we might be in the most simple form in the waking state. We may find ourselves in the dreaming state during the evening. We might find ourselves in deep dreamless sleep. States are always changing from what Wilber might say gross, subtle to causal, or waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. But shifting a state is not the same as shifting your vantage point. States always change. The field of experience is always dynamically evolving and emerging. But these vantage points, these waking up dimensions of our own subjectivity, are things that are actually always ever present. They're always here. And what I found so much in the world is that, you know, in the 60s and in the 70s, some of you were very aware of these psychedelic movements where people would take LSD or acid and then have these amazing experiences. And they might or might not have any shifts in their vantage point. And what I find today is there's a phenomenon where many young people are working with something called ayahuasca, a particular medicine that comes from the Amazon. And in these experiences, people are often using these terms, waking up. They're using these terms, awakening. And in fact, I think it's very dangerous to use terms like awakening for shifts in state. It's very dangerous to use the terms awakening for things where you're just changing the field of your experience. So one of the main motivations for this book is to start to dispel some of this confusion that I saw rampant in our culture. And it's important that people know that you can come from any vantage point, you can come from any layer of subjectivity and have any experience. But what matters is the view. What matters is where you're looking from. What level of awareness are you looking from? And if we begin to pinpoint, if we begin to understand in our own experience that waking up and changing states aren't the same thing, then we're on a better track. And so in this book, what I've done is I've also articulated many, many different types of state experiences that people have. Both state experiences across tradition, state experiences that are generated internally from meditative awareness and meditative experience, but also state experiences that are generated externally through things like psychedelics or entheogens. Because it's important we understand the difference between these. So ultimately what we end up with is a model for a translineage spirituality. And it's a model that includes stages of waking up through vantage points, structures of growing up, which are the lens that we look through, and then different states that are available to each of us in the field of our experience. So we have the knower, the lens of knowing, and the known. And if we can begin to understand that in a more universal way, we provide a platform for how our world's religious traditions can begin interacting with each other, can begin communicating with each other.